Every morning before the city stirred, Amina stepped out into the crisp dawn. A basket of warm bread, steaming porridge, and freshly brewed tea balanced carefully in her arms. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional distant hum of a bus, or the clatter of shop shutters being raised. Her shoes, worn at the heels, whispered across the cracked sidewalks as she made her way to the small, weathered house at the end of Maple Street. Amina's own home was cramped, its peeling paint a reminder of bills unpaid, of struggles carried silently. Her mother worked 2 jobs, her younger brother sickly and often needing medicine they could barely afford. And yet, every morning, without complaint, Amina carried that basket. Because beyond the hardship of her own life, she had a mission, simple but sacred, to bring breakfast to Mr. Langston. Mr. Langston was a man of quiet dignity, his skin like aged mahogany, his eyes sharp beneath heavy lids. Neighbors often whispered about him, old Mr. Langston, retired, keeps to himself, but Amina knew there was more behind the curtains of his modest home. Sometimes he would share small stories, fragments of adventures that sounded almost unbelievable. A wink here, a knowing smile there, and she could sense the life he had lived, a life hidden from the world, tucked neatly behind those tired eyes. As she set the basket on the table each morning, she watched him eat slowly, savoring each bite as though it held the secrets of the world. "Thank you, Amina," he'd say, voice low and warm. "You have no idea how much this means." She would shrug, cheeks burning, pretending it was nothing. But in her chest, pride mingled with hope, a hope that small acts could ripple, that kindness could matter even when no one noticed. The routine had a rhythm to it, almost sacred. She would leave, wave goodbye, and hear the faint clink of his spoon against the bowl. Then she would hurry back to her own small kitchen, washing the few dishes that needed washing, her thoughts drifting to school, to homework, to bills and chores. Life was never easy, but somehow, this ritual grounded her. Then, one morning, everything shifted. She was halfway down the cracked path to her home when she noticed the unusual vehicles parked outside, black SUVs, polished, official, glinting, in the morning sun. A group of men and women in crisp uniforms, boots clicking against concrete, papers in hand, were scanning the surroundings. Military officers. She realized instantly, though, what they wanted here, at her tiny house. She could not fathom. Her heartbeat quickened, each thump echoing in her chest like a warning drum. She glanced back toward Mr. Langston's house, expecting to see him in his doorway, watching with quiet amusement as he often did, but he was nowhere to be seen. The officers turned their heads sharply as if sensing her gaze, and one of them approached her, voice firm but not unkind. "Are you Amina?" The world seemed too narrow to that single question. Her basket felt impossibly heavy in her arms, though it was empty now. Her legs trembled, the familiar streets around her transforming into something alien, threatening. Questions crowded her mind. Why here? Why now? What had she stumbled into, unknowingly, simply by delivering breakfast? And just like that, the morning she had always known quiet, predictable, comforting shattered into uncertainty. The officer's presence was not a mistake. Something extraordinary, something hidden, was about to unfold, and Amina, the girl who had only ever sought to bring kindness into the world, was standing right in the eye of it. She took a shallow breath, the dawn suddenly feeling colder, sharper, alive with possibility and danger. Amina's mornings were never just about Mr. Langston. They were a thread in the intricate tapestry of her own life, a life that demanded more of her than most could imagine. At home, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and cooking fires. Her mother's voice calling from the kitchen, urging her younger brother to take his medicine. There were bills piled high on the counter, rent notices with red stamps, and the constant hum of worry that never seemed to leave. Every coin, every loaf of bread, every errand carried a weight that pressed on her young shoulders. And yet, she made time for Mr. Langston every single day. It wasn't charity, it was respect, devotion, an unspoken understanding that kindness could be revolutionary, even in small doses, but not everyone saw it that way. Neighbors whispered behind closed curtains, "Why does she spend her mornings with him? Doesn't she have school? Don't her own parents struggle enough?" Some shook their heads, dismissing her acts as naive, pointless. Their judgment hung in the air like smoke, heavy and irritating, but Amina ignored it. She had learned early that the smallest acts often carried the largest consequences. Even her classmates at school noticed. Some mocked her for disappearing in the mornings, for carrying heavy baskets to a house no one her age cared about. Others pitied her, eyes wide as if her life was some tragic tale unfolding on a stage. Amina's own pride burned quietly in response. She didn't need approval. Her reward was in the simple nod, the faint smile, the way Mr. Langston's eyes lit up when she arrived with breakfast. That wasn't off until the world began to intrude. Hints of Mr. Langston's past were always there, flickering at the edges of her daily routine. He spoke rarely of it, letting fragments slip like golden coins from a tight-fisted anecdote about strategy, a careful recollection of distant lands, a story of loyalty and betrayal so vivid that Amina sometimes wondered if she were into history itself. She had always sensed it, the invisible weight he carried, the unspoken deeds that marked him as extraordinary. But she had never imagined it could touch her life directly. The neighborhood, oblivious to these hidden truths, continued its quiet surveillance. Voices behind curtains, pointed looks from sidewalks, judgment veiled as concern there were the background music to her mornings. And yet, beneath it all, there was tension, a subtle shift in the air, a hush that fell when she walked past, as if the universe itself knew something was coming. Something beyond ordinary, beyond daily kindness, beyond the small rhythm of bread and tea. Amina's heart carried a mix of hope and anxiety. She had always believed that doing good, even when unnoticed, shaped the world in ways invisible to most. But now, with the sudden appearance of military officers at her door, those beliefs collided with reality. The whispers in the streets felt heavier, darker. The hidden past of the man she served so faithfully was no longer just stories. It was a force, looming and unrelenting, brushing against the edges of her life. She recalled one story he had told her weeks ago, almost in passing, about loyalty, sacrifice, and the shadows cast by those who serve a greater cause. At the time, it had seemed like a tale meant to entertain. Now, it resonated with terrifying clarity. The world was watching, and in its gaze, even the smallest heroics could become dangerous. Amina's hands clenched around the memory of her basket. The warmth of porridge and bread a stark contrast to the chill crawling up her spine. The neighborhood's judgment, once trivial, now felt like a distant warning of the forces she was about to confront. And Mr. Langston, silent and observant, had always known that the day would come when her courage and his hidden legacy would collide with reality. Somewhere beyond her front gate, the officers waited. Their presence transformed the familiar streets, the routine morning walks, into a stage set for revelation and reckoning. Amina's small acts, unnoticed and uncelebrated, had become part of a larger narrative, one in which the stakes were no longer just kindness, they were survival-y truths, and the courage to stand when the world demanded it. The morning sun had barely climbed above the rooftops when the echo of boots on concrete shattered the fragile calm of Amina's street. She froze mid-step, the empty basket still heavy in her hands, her heart hammering as the sound grew louder, deliberate, unyielding. Outside her gate, black SUVs gleamed like predators in the pale light, their tires crunching on gravel with a rhythm that seemed to mark the pulse of fate itself. Men and women in crisp, dark uniforms moved with precision, their badges catching the sun in sharp, blinding glints. Every movement was controlled, rehearsed, the discipline of their stance telling her this was no ordinary visit. Amina's legs felt rooted to the spot as a uniformed officer approached, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning her as though she were both a puzzle and a warning. "Are you Amina?" the officer asked, voice firm, neutral, yet carrying a weight she could not place. It was not a question that invited casual answers. Her throat tightened, words caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. Inside, Mr. Langston sat in his favorite chair, the morning light falling softly across his lined face. He didn't flinch, didn't rise. His hands rested calmly on the armrests, fingers interlaced as if he had been expecting this precise moment. There was a quiet authority in his stillness, a patience that spoke of decades spent navigating danger and deceit. Yet the tension in the air was palpable, a current that seemed to coil around the room and squeeze at her chest. The neighbors had begun to notice. Curtains twitched, doors cracked open just enough to reveal suspicious eyes. Whispered speculations drifted down the street. What's happening at Amina's house? Militoric here, in this neighborhood. The gossip spread quickly, fueled by imagination and fear, inflating every ordinary detail into a story of conspiracy and urgency. Children peeked from behind gates, and the street, once quiet and mundane, became a stage for anxiety and rumor. Officers spoke in clipped tones now, their questions indirect, probing. "We are looking for someone connected to Mr. Langston," one said, his eyes briefly meeting Amina's before shifting back to the interior of the house. Her mind raced. Who could they be looking for? What had Mr. Langston done that required this kind of attention? She felt a tremor of panic, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her like a stone. Yet Mr. Langston remained a picture of composure, a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted around them. He leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing, and gave a subtle nod that Amina could barely detect. It was an acknowledgement, almost imperceptible, but it carried reassurance. He had walked through storms, faced scrutiny and danger, and she realized, with a mix of awe and fear, that whatever was coming, he had already anticipated it. The officers moved methodically, scanning the property, asking for identification, their voices calm but unyielding. Amina could see the sharp lines of authority in their every gesture, the precision honed by years of training, Their presence was a living contradiction to the warmth she had carried in her morning baskets, or in control versus compassion. And in a sense, rumors among the neighbors reached a fever pitch. One elderly woman whispered to another, "It's the government, I tell you. He must be someone important." A man leaned out his window muttering, "Perhaps he's involved in something dangerous or criminal." Each speculation made the tension tighter, each glance toward the house another spark on the tinder of curiosity and fear. Inside, Amina's hands shook slightly as she set the basket down on the counter, her knuckles white. The warmth of the porridge she had brought earlier seemed distant now, a memory of a world untouched by scrutiny. She glanced at Mr. Langston, searching for guidance, and saw only that calm certainty, the faintest hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He was unshaken because he knew something she did not yet understand. The officer's visit was not random, it was inevitable, connected to the legacy he had carried quietly all these years. One officer stepped forward, papers in hand, voice steady yet heavy with implication. "We need to speak with Mr. Langston. It's about matters that require immediate attention." Amina's breath caught. Matters that required attention. Those words, so formal and measured, carried an invisible weight, a promise of danger and revelation. She felt a chill creep up her spine as the officer's boots tapped again, echoing through the quiet street, a sound she would never forget. The whispers of neighbors, the glances, the subtle tension that had hung in the air for weeks, it all converged at this moment, amplifying her fear and anticipation. Every instinct screamed that life as she knew it was changing, that the hidden currents of Mr. Langston's past were about to crash into her own, pulling her into a world she had never imagined. And then, as if sensing the enormity of what was about to unfold, Mr. Langston finally spoke, his voice steady, carrying both authority and reassurance. "It's time you see the truth, Amina," he said, eyes locking with hers. "Everything you've done, it matters far more than you realize." In that instant, the ordinary morning, the bread, the porridge, the ritual of kindness vanished. The world had tilted, the street no longer safe or familiar. The officers waited, the neighbors whispered, and Amina stood at the threshold of a reality that would demand courage she had never known she possessed. Amina's mind raced as the officers' eyes scanned the small living room, their expressions a mixture of suspicion and professional calculation. She felt tiny in the face of their authority, yet her gaze kept returning to Mr. Langston. He remained seated, calm, his posture impeccable, his hands resting lightly on the arms of his chair. There was a weight in his silence, a quiet tension that seemed to hum through the air, and in that moment, she realized there was far more to him than the kindly old man who had welcomed her every morning. One of the officers cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Mr. Langston, your service records. We need confirmation of your identity. Protocol requires verification." There was a subtle edge to the word protocol, a rigid insistence that suggested distrust, a bureaucratic shield meant to hide uncertainty. Amina swallowed hard, her chest tight, yet she could sense the undercurrent of something larger, something unspeakably significant. Then, slowly, deliberately, Mr. Langston began to speak. His voice carried the calm authority of a man used to commanding respect, of a man who had walked through arenas of danger that most could never imagine. "You question my record," he said, eyes steady on the officer. "You doubted the loyalty and service of a lifetime. Very well. Let us remind you why records alone cannot capture the weight of sacrifice." Amina's breath caught as he recounted fragments of a life she had only glimpsed through anecdotes. He had been a decorated strategist and advisor whose plans had shifted the course of national security on missions that never made headlines. Quietly, invisibly, he had shaped outcomes in far-off lands, orchestrating decisions that saved thousands of lives. Each story, told in fragments of precision and restraint, revealed brilliance tempered by a humanitide blend of intellect and moral courage that seemed almost unreal. The officers shifted uneasily, their formal rigidity faltering under the weight of truth. Some maintained masks of suspicion, but others, those who had been trained to recognize authority beyond rank, began to realize the magnitude of the man before them. Protocols, forms, and checklists could not contain history lived fully, his history that had shaped nations in silence. And then the connection became clear to Amina. Every morning she had brought him bread, porridge, tea, simple gestures, small acts of compassion. She had unknowingly linked herself to a hidden legacy, one of courage, duty, and profound impact. Her kindness had bridged the ordinary world and the extraordinary, placing her in a narrative far larger than herself. In that realization, awe and inspiration surged through her. The girl who delivered breakfast was no longer just a helper. She had become part of a story of heroism that transcended age, rank, and expectation. One officer, younger and visibly tense, stepped forward, his voice shaking slightly. We didn't realize," but Mr. Langston raised a hand, and the words faltered. "You act as though service alone can be measured by forms and files," he said. "Yet it is the courage, the choices, and the integrity behind those actions that define their worth. His gaze swept past the officers, landing on Amina with an intensity that made her heart flutter. And she, he said, voice gentle but firm, has shown courage in a way most overlook. Her heart, pure, steadfast, unwavering. The room fell silent. The officers, the neighbors peering from behind cracked curtains, even Amina herself, felt the gravity of the moment. Here was a man whose life had been hidden from public recognition, a life that had shaped far more than anyone knew. And here was a young girl whose compassion had made her unknowingly part of that legacy. The narrative flipped in an instant. The ordinary girl, the one who had feared she was insignificant, now stood at the center of an extraordinary story. Mr. Langston leaned forward, his voice softening. It is often the unseen acts, the unnoticed bravery, that carry the most weight. You, Amina, have understood that truth long before anyone else. That is why you are here, why you are part of this moment. He paused, letting the words settle, their weight sinking deep into her chest. The officers, once rigid and procedural, now faced a choice of their own. Some continued to hold suspicion, bound by rules and paperwork, while others shifted, their posture relaxing, the recognition of integrity and human decency eclipsing protocol. Amina could feel the tension ease slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that courage and compassion could defy fear, could bridge worlds. She looked at Mr. Langston, awe and admiration swirling in her chest, realizing that the small ritual of breakfast had led her to a revelation far beyond her imagination. She had stepped into a world of secrets, heroism, and responsibility without even knowing it. And now, standing in the quiet aftermath of revelation, she understood that her ordinary life had intersected with the extraordinary in ways that would change everything. Outside, the street had grown still. Neighbors whispered and officers took notes, and the sun climbed higher, casting light on the profound truth that courage and kindness, even in small, daily acts, could ripple into worlds far beyond comprehension. Amina's role was no longer simple. She was no longer just the girl who delivered breakfast. She had become a witness, a participant, a bridge between ordinary humanity and the hidden legacies that shaped nations. And as she met Mr. Langston's steady gaze, a spark of determination ignited in her. The story was only beginning, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The tension in the room was palpable, each heartbeat echoing like a drumbeat of fate. The officers had gathered, a mix of suspicion and protocol etched into their postures, while neighbors craned their necks from windows and doorways, eager to witness what had become the centerpiece of the morning. Amina stood close to Mr. Langston, her palms slightly trembling, but her chin lifted with quiet defiance. One officer, rigid and bureaucratic, attempted to assert authority. Your actions, Miss Amina, though well-intentioned, could have jeopardized national security. You've interfered in matters far beyond your understanding. His words, sharp and calculated, were meant to intimidate, but they landed strangely against the weight of truth that filled the room. Mr. Langston's eyes met hers, and she felt a surge of courage pass between them. He spoke slowly, his voice steady yet commanding. Courage is not measured by protocol or rank. It is measured by the choices we make when no one is watching, by the integrity we uphold in the face of fear. The officer faltered, his rehearsed certainty cracking under the quiet power of honesty and moral clarity. Amina, emboldened by the old man's presence, found her own voice. I did what I believed was right, she said firmly, not for recognition, not for reward, but because it mattered. Because small acts can change lives even in ways we don't yet understand. Her words hung in the air, simple yet potent, cutting through suspicion with the force of truth. Neighbors shifted, murmurs of awe and respect rippling through the street. The whispers, once judgmental, now carried admiration. Children peeked from behind gates, mothers straightened in their doorways, and even the officers who had doubted her began to see the extraordinary courage in a young girl who had acted with nothing but a pure heart. Mr. Langston's expression softened into a proud smile, the kind that carried decades of experience, hardship, and quiet victories. It takes more bravery to show compassion in an ordinary life than to command armies in extraordinary circumstances, he said. His gaze lingered on Amina, a silent acknowledgement that her kindness had bridged worlds, elevated her from helper to hero. The bureaucratic officers, once imposing, now seemed diminished, their rigidity exposed against the undeniable human truth before them. They nodded, some with reluctance, others with newfound respect, their paperwork and protocols suddenly seeming trivial in comparison to courage and integrity. Amina's heart swelled, not with arrogance, but with quiet triumph. She had faced fear, stood unwavering before authority, and her actions had been acknowledged in the most profound way. The street outside felt lighter, the air charged with collective admiration and silent celebration. Mr. Langston rose, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. You've reminded us all, he said, that the measure of a life is not in power or title, but but in the courage to do what is right when it matters most. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the street in golden light, Amina looked around. At the neighbors, the officers, the quiet world that had watched her small acts ripple into something far greater. She realized that courage, integrity, and compassion were rewards in themselves, but today, they had been witnessed, honored, and celebrated. In that moment, she understood the profound truth that even the smallest, most ordinary actions, when rooted in bravery and kindness, could stand tall against the mightiest of forces, leaving a legacy far beyond what anyone could imagine. The days that followed felt different for Amina, though nothing about her routine had truly changed. The basket of breakfast still rested in her arms each morning. The streets still whispered with neighbors' curiosity, but now their whispers carried admiration instead of judgment. Recognition had found her not just from Mr. Langston, not just from the officers, but from the small world she had quietly touched through steadfast kindness. Opportunities began to appear. Subtle at first, then undeniable. Invitations to mentorship programs, letters of acknowledgement from those who valued courage and empathy, and a renewed sense of purpose that flowed through her every step. Amina realized that her daily ritual, once seen as ordinary, was extraordinary in its constancy, in its moral courage, and in the ripple effect it created. Each act of kindness, no matter how small, had carried a power far beyond her imagination. As dawn broke one morning, she walked down the familiar cracked sidewalks, basket in hand, the first rays of sunlight painting the street gold. Mr. Langston watched from his doorway, a quiet smile of pride on his face, while the neighborhood stirred around them, buzzing with a newfound respect. In that light, the world felt vast and full of possibility, yet intimately connected by acts of empathy and integrity. Amina's footsteps carried hope, her heart carried courage, and the lesson was clear. Heroism often lives in the small, consistent choices we make, and those choices can change the world. One day, one act, one heart at a time.